Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Torah and Psychology. B'ezrat Hashem, please make this episode awesome. So I'm in a calmer vibe because this topic, I believe, is one of the one that affects us the most. It's very real and it's very hard to heal and solve. Many of us experience it, and that is the struggle with self-esteem. You know, even today, I was like judging myself on how much I got done, or I was hating on the people on Facebook who posted their like to-do lists and got it all done. And I was like, whoa, 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 Neely, you're struggling with some self-worth and some self-esteem here for sure. So I scoured the internet and I scoured my books. That's just one shelf. There's like lots of other shelves around here. And I found the most profound article on self-esteem. And I'm going to read it to you. So this is like story time, but this is also the episode that you should read when you want to have a pen and paper in hand and you feel like going serious and deep, because by the end of this article, it's a little depressing. Then I will share from my own research and my own work how I believe we can deal with this story of self-esteem and why it can be so hard. But this is definitely an episode for a day where you're ready to like dig in and be patient. So if that's today for you, come on down. If not, why don't you just click over to another episode. So I can't say it better than this guy. This is an article from aish.org, and of all of my books and of all of my research, this one really summed it up quite well. And it's an excerpt from the book Free Will Works by Dr. David Lieberman. So perhaps you maybe even want to buy the book. The article is called The Choice of Self-Esteem. And the subheadline is Our Constant Struggle Between Reality and Denial. Okay, y'all ready for this? Okay, so I'm simply going to read the article to you, and I bless us to open our hearts, because when I first read this, I was like, there was a fear emerged, a lot of fear emerged, like, oh my God, do I do this? Obviously, if there's an article about it, enough of us do it that someone's got to write about it. So, la 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 la. An endless stream of decisions flows through our lives from the beginning to the end, but not all choices are created equal. Whether we'll wiggle our right or left finger or pick a red blanket over a blue one is a matter of preference. It is a choice, yes, but without moral significance. Regardless of the outcome, we will neither beam with pride or experience pangs of shame based on these simple free choices. Of course, life is filled with hard choices that have real consequences. And as we know, making the right choice is not always easy or comfortable. Raise your hand if right now you have a life decision that you have to make and it is not easy and it's not comfortable. Self-esteem can help. It stimulates the desire to invest in ourselves and provides the energy for self-discipline. You know, if any of you were just scrolling on Facebook while paying attention, you know what I'm saying? That was just because I do it. So it provides the energy for self-discipline, pushing us towards responsible behavior. Moreover, each and every time we rise above our nature, we work with self-discipline, we bolster this key ingredient to psychological and spiritual health. Now, here's where it gets a little scary. To the extent that we do not love ourselves, though, our willingness to endure short-term pain for long-term gain wanes. Who wants to put in all that effort, enduring heartache and hardship and just hard work for somebody who they do not even like? So this is the moment where we want to ask ourselves, do we like ourselves? Do we love ourselves? Like before I began doing self-worth work, I thought so highly of myself, but really what I thought so highly of was all the coping strategies I had developed instead of really just loving and accepting myself. Now, this is outside of the article. I'm just sharing with you. So to the extent we don't love ourselves, it gets harder. Why help someone you don't like? Now, this mindset is understandable, but quite problematic, because when we shirk our obligations and shun new opportunities, do you guys ever do that? I do that. I totally shirk responsibility sometimes and obligation and shun new opportunities. Instead of saying like, yes, I'm game, let's do it. I'm like, so the problem is that when we do that, we lose more than we might expect, says this author. Findings show that the tendency to avoid pain inherent in taking responsibility is, get ready for this one, this is cringeworthy, the primary basis of all mental illness. Let me read that again. The tendency to avoid the pain inherent in taking responsibility is the primary basis of all mental illness. Oh my goodness, I never ever realized that. Shirking responsibility can be the basis of mental illness. Oh my gosh. And it is central to nearly every emotional issue, including anxiety, depression, and addiction. I told you this was a bit heavy, but it's very real, and most of us suffer it silently. So let's just expose some taboo things so we can normalize it and help ourselves. So he says, this is how it happens. Live or let die. Within all of us exist three inner forces that are often at odds with each other: the soul, the ego, and the body. In short, the soul seeks to do what's right. The ego wants to be right and be seen in an optimal light. And the body just wants to escape from it all. Glug, glug. Yeah, we know it. Or perhaps it'd even be a to-do list. Doing what is comfortable or enjoyable, that's a body drive. Examples of indulgences of this force are overeating, oversleeping, or in effect, just doing something merely because of how it feels. So that's the body. An ego drive can run the gamut from making a joke at someone else's expense to making a lavish purchase beyond their means. That's ego. When the ego reigns, we're drawn not to what is good, but to what makes us look good. So over time, these choices for the body and for the ego, they erode our self-esteem. Because when we succumb to immediate gratification or live to protect an image, think of your social media use. How often are we promoting an image? What happens is, now check this out, this is hard. We become angry with ourselves. And again, I believe this is more subconsciously. I don't think that like people are walking around like consciously knowing I'm angry at myself, but I'll say they, but really I know that a lot of the anger that I carry is I'm simply angry at myself. And ultimately, we feel empty inside. When we don't like who we are, we punish ourselves with activities that are disguised as pleasurable: excessive eating, alcohol or drug abuse, meaningless diversions and excursions, pursuing glory. We long to love ourselves, but instead we lose ourselves. Unable to invest in our own well-being, we substitute illusions for love. These ethereal delights mask our self-contempt, right? Make it look good, eat the good food, go out, put your food online. And since the comfort sought is rewarded instead by greater pain, we further descend into despair. As our behavior becomes increasingly reckless and irresponsible, and that doesn't mean you're crashing cars and your house is a mess. It could mean your bills are not getting paid, or you're still not dating after all this time, or et cetera, et cetera. The ego, what does it do as things get worse and worse? The ego swells to compensate for our feelings of guilt and shame. Our perspective narrows, and we see more of the self and less of the world. Because again, the ego is compensating. This makes us ever more sensitive and unstable. Have you ever felt sensitive when you're not happy with the way your life is working, or perhaps emotionally unstable? And what's interesting, just to take a pause, is ego is like the essence of Egypt, of Mitzrayim. When we're slaves and we don't have self-worth, or we're not able to look after ourselves, the compensation is ego. I swell, and that's why we had to have matzah, because it was like the decompression of all that swelling, but not to humiliate us, to bring us into reality check, so that we could actually begin to love ourselves for everything we are, with all of our pains, shames, and shadows, and all of our glory. We'll get there. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I truly identify with this article. I feel like the more that I'm compensating for things that are not wise in my behavior, for my bodily behavior and my ego behavior, the more I get sensitive and less stable, which is very embarrassing to admit, but mental health is a real thing. And all of us deal with it in some degree, whether or not you have medication or a prescription or a label, or you just feel sometimes like however you feel, that's difficult, you know? And again, women might end up crying about this, whereas guys might end up repressing this, but all of us in our own reactions with our own self-awareness. Okay, so the opposite, right? So remember, this article is entitled "Our Constant Struggle Between Reality and Denial." So if we're in denial of taking care of ourselves, of doing what's right for ourselves, of putting in the hard work, then we'll puff up our ego and get into denial. But here's what happens: the opposite. The clearer our perspective, the more reality we allow in, and the more objective and rational are our attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors. As the ego grows, the seedlings of emotional instability take root, because any distortion of our true self produces a misrepresentation of the world. And if our grasp of reality is flawed, then our adjustment to life will suffer. So another way of saying this is, to the degree that we cannot accept our imperfections and our limitations, we just shift fault elsewhere. In other words, if there's nothing wrong with me, there must be something wrong with you. This is really crazy because I'm currently in a little bit of a fight with someone, and I was just thinking about them today. What's wrong with them? And I was like, oh man, yeah, I'm thinking really inside what's wrong with me, but I've just shifted it. And in order for us to remain unblemished, because we had to puff up that ego, so it'd be too painful to think I've done something wrong, we're forced to then distort the world around us. When a person loses his sanity, and I don't think this is talking about like running through the streets naked in a straitjacket. I just mean when a person loses their true grip on reality, the truth, the ability to see, accept, and respond to his world, he has lost perspective. Here it even says all perspective. The Talmud states that Adam Harishon, Adam, like Adam and Eve, could see from one end of the world to the other. Before eating of the tree of knowledge, Adam had no yetzer hara, no ego, no evil inclination. So this entity was represented by the serpent. It was external to Adam. And so Adam's perspective was unfettered. He could still see the world clearly because ego was not getting in the way. And just as a side note, I'd recommend at this point that if you want to understand more the psychological concept of ego, you can go to YouTube, to the Diamond Net, seek a woman named Emerald, and she has an amazing video on the ego, the persona. These explain all of these terms more clearly from Jungian and Freudian perspectives. I think these were particularly Jungian perspectives. So if you're struggling with the words ego or persona, you can do some side research, and that's a great recommendation. So the Yetzer Hara entered only when Adam ate of the tree and became alert to the difference between good and evil, good and evil. This shifted his perspective. Man's awareness was reduced from the objective world of truth and falsehood to the subjective view of this is good, this is bad. And after the sin, human beings would forever see the world through the cloudy lens of I, iPhone, iPad, Mac, the I. That's the generation we're living in. And I want to tell you, this is not for nothing. As we are so close to Mashiach, the greatest light in the world is about to be revealed, the greatest goodness, the greatest peace. At the same time, because of the law of polarity, equal and opposite forces, the greatest darkness must be exposed, the greatest self-hate, the greatest struggles with the ego, the I, self-esteem. So if you're struggling with self-esteem, you're not alone. and it's part of the unfolding of reality. Emotional instability is fundamentally a lack of moral clarity, because to the degree to which the ego infects us, that is the degree to which we are not judging the reality accurately. To this extent, we're all somewhat sick. Now, when I read that, I felt very sad, but then I realized Rav Shlomo Karlibach says this world should be called a Beit Cholim, a hospital, because really we all come here to heal. So at whatever point we have clarity that a given behavior is wrong, bechira, free will, emerges, and it becomes a genuine choice. That is, to choose good over evil. That is, in other words, to choose what's truly good for us over that which is evil for us. So this could be something in as simple as eating the whole bag of Doritos, which is like so good, but obviously so not healthy, right? So like, the ego might perceive it as so good, let me have it, take it in. But the body, or like the actual body, not the body in the ego story, is like, no, don't do that to me. That's so not loving. Why are you putting flame retardants in my body? So anyways, now it gets even deeper and maybe even a little heavier. He goes on to talk about the roots of unhappiness. On a conscious level, we cannot easily admit to ourselves that we are selfish or lazy, much less a failure or flawed. The ego is thus equipped with an elaborate array of defense mechanisms to thwart the harshness of reality. And as these defenses emerge, instability, which can be seen as the chasm between truth and our ability to accept it, develops. Defense mechanisms can be anything ranging from intellectualization of our neurotic defenses, reactions, dissociation, repression, rationalizing. How often are we rationalizing our behavior? So often, right? These are fairly common. If it gets further, we might get into like immature defenses that include fantasies, projections. Okay, many of us are projecting our pain on others. Passive aggressiveness, acting out. These, when we act like this, the benefit is they like temporarily ease distress and anxiety provoked by an uncomfortable situation. But if we keep performing like this, we really start distorting reality because we're so busy blaming and being passive aggressive and projecting and acting out. It almost becomes normal. And the worst of all is, God forbid, nobody should know of it, but a little bit, we all taste of it. We get into what's called psychotic denial or delusional projections. And this is a way as if it's like we try to recreate the external experiences to do away with the need to cope with reality. And at this point, I just want to take a minute and put my hands on our hearts and say, it's so hard to cope with reality, my friends. Adulting is not easy, okay? So just a bit, no, a ton, a heap, a truckload of compassion, empathy. Here, choose a word, okay? Compassion, empathy, understanding, gentility, nurturing, kindness, sweetness, mothering, softness, and love. Choose any one of those words. I'll try to do it again. Empathy, compassion, sweetness, gentility, softness, mothering, nurturing, kindness, love, and sweetness. Choose one and see if you can talk to yourself in that voice, because coping with reality isn't easy. So maybe we defer to all these other strategies, but just being here, we're starting to get more real with ourselves. He said, our egos color the world so that we are not tarnished, but before we airbrush reality, a collision occurs in the unaccessed caverns of the unconscious between the truth and falsehood, producing the psychological phenomenon called cognitive dissonance, that feeling of discomfort when we are holding two contradictory ideas. From a Torah standpoint, a cognitive dissonance is a byproduct of the tension between the Yetzer HaTov, the soul, and the Yetzer Hara, the ego. A choice to either accept reality or reduce dissonance by any of the above-mentioned coping mechanisms. The most common of these are, see if you're guilty of them, avoidance, denial, and justification. Ashamnu, avoidance, bagadnu, denial. Ashamnu, bagadnu. Gazanu, justification. I'm not actually comparing those. I'm just saying, how often do we all use these mechanisms? So what's the solution, or what are we even talking about? So first of all, one example that he brings from reality is smoking. That's a perfect example of cognitive dissonance, because we all know that it's completely unhealthy. If you look at some of the pacts, they say smoking causes death, and we just know so well how it's not good for us, but we choose not to think about it, or deny the evidence, or justify it. Oh, like, I really need this, like I just can't take it. Or alternatively, we can accept the truth and take steps to quit. Physiologically speaking, research shows that reasoning areas of the brain virtually shut down when we're confronted with dissonant information, and the emotional circuits of the brain light up unreservedly when the consonance is restored. Similarly, and that just means, let me just put this in simple words, that means when we start to own up to the truth and face it instead of avoid it, and say it like frankly instead of deny it, or admit it instead of justify it, then the brain clears itself. And as the sages say, there's no happiness like the resolution of doubt. Right? I think it's Hatarata Svekot. I'm sorry, I don't know what it is. And that's why the ego seizes an opportunity to reconcile this internal conflict. So we want to be careful when our self-image is on the line, when our ego is defending us, because it can lead us into desires for self-approval or behaviors that aren't working. So we've got a bit more to go, but you're doing great. Maybe, I hope you are. I hope that you're finding this as fascinating as I am. I just found that this is, of all the books, of all the articles, of all the videos, this is the most straightforward. Next part, a slave for approval. To the length to which people will go to avoid facing the truth is nothing short of staggering, right? Like when we're in blame, we don't really admit anything that we've done wrong. We just always tell the other person what they've done wrong. And as we noted above, denying reality does not come without a price. Exhausted and on the edge, our ego edits our world to ensure that we leave in nothing that will hurt us or reveal us, either to ourselves or to others. Preoccupied with potential threats to our self-image, we're on guard 24/7. You ever snap at someone? You want to know why? Feisty? Get annoyed? Why is the most common phrase in our generation so annoying? Because we're on such defense, because our esteem is so low that we feel like we have to guard ourselves and protect ourselves and defend ourselves. We may not even realize how much of our attitude and behavior, and indeed our very identity, is self-styled in order to avoid self-reflection, or to compensate for self-hate, and perhaps to project an image that betrays neither. In the exchange, we lose ourselves, contorting to the images demanded by others to win their praise. The great Musar leader, Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv, writes, if you observe people carefully, you will see that someone that loves the approval of others will, as it were, sell himself as a slave to those who flatter him. He won't even realize it's happening to him, however obvious it may be to an outside observer. Now, if you think that you do not relate to this, think of how you react to your social media when you get a like or an approval. How many times when you post something, do you just, and this is obviously coming from doing it myself, do you go back and look how many people liked it, how many views you got, how many comments, how many times do you write again so that the people respond, so more people will see it, right? So unsurprisingly, we are never truly satiated. When we do not love ourselves, we cannot give love, and we cannot feel love. Tati, help! Even when the supply is plentiful, with an adulation beyond measure, we experience a different reality, an endless flow of tainted love. Ultimately, we remain empty inside. And this is something I can speak on myself. I am working on self-love. I get love from everywhere, but for some reason, it just doesn't go in. Well, it doesn't go in because I'm not filling myself up with that, so it doesn't even resonate. And all of that as if goes to waste. Please bless me to work on this. Imagine pouring water into a cup that has no bottom. As someone pours in the water, the cup feels and looks full. As long as the cup is constantly being filled, we're content. But the minute someone stops filling it with undivided attention, respect, or adoration, the cup quickly becomes empty, and we are left as thirsty as ever. Speaking of which, a shattered cup will never be full, and our thirst can never be quenched, no matter how much we receive. Whew, I hope this is touching you the way it's touching me. L'chaim, I already made a bracha. Is that true? No, I benched since. Oy baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bidbaro. Just so you know, if you said amen, you can say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. You only say amen when it's live on a screen or if you're in person. Okay, herein lies the basis for many failed relationships, right? This is now, we've talked about self-esteem and where it comes from and the Torah ideology. And now obviously we're going to get to the point where we realize lack of self-esteem is going to have an impact on our relationships. When we lack self-esteem, we push away the very people we so desperately want in our lives. Tell me you can identify with this either for yourself or somebody that you've been close to. Because we can't fathom why anyone would love someone who is so unlovable. And whatever affection or kindness forces its way through to us is hardly embraced. Such overtures do not serve to comfort, but to confuse. We're almost there. To compound matters, the less self-control we have, the more desperate we are to manipulate the events and people around us, especially those closest to us, either overtly or passive-aggressively. So remember, we're talking about how self-control often leads to self-esteem, which leads to healthier relationships and vice versa. Since self-control leads to self-respect, we need to feel as if we are in control of somebody, something, anything to gain a sense of traction. Does that make sense? I'm going to say it again because this is really mind-blowing. This guy is on point. I think I'm going to order his book. Since self-control leads to self-respect, we need to feel as if we are in control of someone, of something, of anything to gain that sense of traction. Low self-esteem can thus trigger a powerful, unconscious desire to usurp authority, to overstep bounds, and to mistreat those who care about us. Oh, it hurts me to read this. When we don't like ourselves, we suffer, our relationships suffer, everyone suffers. Whew. Now, as I said, that was going to be heavy, and it is heavy, and it's real, and it's probably the most important work that we will be able to do for ourselves in this lifetime. Now, as a therapist and somebody who deals with this topic personally and professionally, and with all my students over the last bajillion decades, the hardest thing is, so what, Neely? What do we do? How do I raise my self-esteem? How do I raise my self-worth? How do I raise my self-love? Like, this is so frustrating. Everyone's telling me to love and accept myself, and I don't even know how or what to do. So we're going to review a few tricks. This might be a longer share tonight because even though that was hard article, I want to pick us back up and give us a lot of hope. Now, something I learned about hope, which maybe we'll discuss in another episode, is that hope is really made possible when action is taken. Because if I'm hoping for something, but I don't do anything about it, I cannot sustain that hope. Then I'm just having magical thinking. And yeah, Hashem can be magical, but hope is based on action. So first and foremost, what he's saying is, how do we love ourselves? How do we begin to have more self-esteem when we have more self-control? So goal setting. What is something that we can do what is something we can even reflect upon in your life right now to have more self-control? And this can be little things. Like for me, something I'm working on is putting less salt. Or something, because I love salt. So I used to be like, Himalayan salt is healthy. Let me pour it everywhere, all over my stuff, right? But now, as part of my routine to exercise greater self-control, I actively try to use less salt. Another personal example is I've come off of caffeine. Now, I love coffee more than I love caffeine. I love caffeine and coffee more than I even love salt. Actually, it's a close second. Yeah, I don't know. But I've actually come off of coffee just as an exercise of self-control. Those are just practical things. Self-control could be with regards to exercise. Another practice of self-control that I'm doing right now is working on not cursing or using swear words, because it used to flow from my mouth. I grew up on 90s rap, like that's what's cool. So another exercise, for example, is for me, cursing, limiting cursing. So for you, it's just a good idea to think about self-control. If self-control leads to self-esteem and self-love, and it's time to take action, well, what are a few things that you can do in your life? Other examples are making sure you set an alarm to get up in the morning, making sure you set an alarm to go to bed at night, putting your phone away, setting yourself boundaries and time limits on your social media. The list is endless. Only you know what you need to work on, but certainly beginning with self-control, it makes a statement to the body, to ourselves that says, I'm important. I matter. I'm worth something. There's hope for me. See, without self-control, it's like nobody believes in you. A lot of people have resentment towards parents who are super lenient because they felt like, oh, my parents must not have believed in me because they didn't set any boundaries or rules. They didn't have any control over me. And so they just feel like, oh, well, they just must not have loved me. Well, that carries on into adulthood. If I'm not setting boundaries for myself, if I'm not setting up, establishing things to help work on my self-control, well, then I probably don't love myself, says the mind, which understands our behavior, right? I've worked with somebody in the past who needed to make sure that she set aside 5 minutes of prayer before she turned the TV on in the morning, because if not, that was it. And what does that message say? Your prayer is not important. And if your prayer is not important, whew, you must really not be important, right? So the main thing that I want to say, the main principle besides setting self-control is the next idea. And that next idea is making yourself the most important person in the world. In fact, I'm going to draw a little hashtag for you, because this is what I said to myself for a while, and I put it on all my davening things. I made notes for myself. I needed to believe Mipitu. Hashtag Mipitu. What is Mipitu? Most important person in the world. Now you might think, well, that sounds a little cocky, Neely. You're gonna come to try to believe or act out that you're the most important person in the world. And you know what? For the first time in my life, please God, yes. I want to make myself the most important person in my world, or even in the world for myself. Because if I'm the most important person in the world, then I have to take care of myself as such. I have to take care of my body as such. I have to honor and respect my needs as such. And so that whole article was just to get us to this 1 minute where I can offer you this idea. What if you were the most important person in the world? And if that's too much for you, what if you're the most important person in your life? Now, parents, you might be saying, but my kids, come on. We all know that example from the airplane. To really help your kids, in case of emergency, when the masks fall down, you put your ventilation on first and then theirs. Because if yours is not on, you can help them all you want, but they might lose out on you, God forbid, at the end of the day, because you're nowhere, or you're dealing with mental instability, or you're feeling such low self-esteem that in the end of the day, maybe you've compensated for a hot minute for them. But if you're falling apart after a little bit, it doesn't help anybody. Especially generationally and learned behaviors wise, we want our children to understand that each of us must treat ourselves as if we were made in the Tselem Elokim, as if we were truly in the image of God and we were the most important person in the world. And then you want to ask yourself, what would I do differently if I was the most important person in my life? And this might be a difficult question because you might need to reform a lot of things. I sure do. I don't even have people to look after. And it's so hard for me to make myself number one. In fact, for years, I woke up, and the second I woke up, I got to my computer and started doing tzedakah and chesed. And only recently I realized what a crazy coping strategy that was. I was busy helping the whole wide world, neglecting myself. That doesn't last. That's why I'm getting all the love in the world from everybody else, but I can't feel it on the outside and the inside, because I was trying to get it from everywhere else but me. And now I realize, what if I was the most important person in my life? This is a big question. Okay, so first of all, we talked about self-control and setting goals. Second of all, we're talking about making yourself the most important person in the world. And third of all, and here's a big one, see where you're upset at other people for the ways they're treating you. Can you make a list? What are you really upset at? Why are you like, recently I was upset at somebody for excluding me, was my blame. Okay, now what do you do with that upset? Or let's say it's a spouse and they never take care of me, or they always put themselves first. Or just really, if you can, take a moment now and go into all your judgments and upsets about other person. They never pay attention when I'm on the phone. They're always typing emails when we talk. They never make enough time for me. They always make sure that they are well fed. They, because what the answer of the they is everywhere we're saying they, we're saying, I'm so upset that I don't do that for myself. They put themselves first. Why aren't I putting myself first? They make sure they're well taken care of and well slept. Why aren't you doing that for you? They're always, you know, going to have fun and leaving me to do the work. You go have fun and leave the work. It will figure itself out. But the third component and or like mechanism, tool that we can use to increase self-esteem, at least a trick, a hack, is we look at all the places we're so upset with everyone else and why they didn't fulfill our needs. And we say, oh, that's where I need to fulfill my needs. Oh my gosh. And you will surely realize that everywhere you're upset at your mom, everywhere that you're upset at your dad, and all the reasons you're upset at your spouse, all the reasons you're upset at your siblings, your kids, your employer, the people at work, right? She always just takes off during lunch break and comes back late. And it's like, you know why I'm upset? It's because I don't just take off at lunch break and just come back when I want. So when we get upset at the people around us, it's the most profound reflection to those things that our needs are calling out for and I'm not attending to yet, because I don't have enough self-esteem yet to tell me that my needs are so important, that my things need to be taken care of. And maybe it takes self-control, and maybe it takes discipline, and maybe it takes believing that I'm the most important person in the world. But if not, at the end of the day, with all of that low self-esteem, there's no love on the inside. And we start to become delusional and angry and project, as opposed to being filled with love and having our needs met. Now, this is very hard because it also takes escaping victim mentality and stepping into responsibility. And here I'd like to recommend the video of men's coach Doron Geber, Dorongeber, on his video online on victim mentality. This helps explain the philosophy of what does it mean, victim mentality, and what do we do about it. Okay, so we discussed, you know, self-control, setting goals for self-control. We discussed making yourself the most important person in the world. I feel like I should write this down and help you visually. Okay, let's do it. Self-control goals. That's number one. Most important person in the world philosophy, really thinking about this, having this discussion with your best friend, seeing where you rock in this, seeing where you struggle in this. Next, we talked about looking at where you are upset at others. Woo, they suck. Woo, because likely it's a projection of that very thing you need to be doing for yourself. And on this note, I suggested researching the video online called Victim Mentality. Okay, and next I want to suggest the three ways to raise your vibration. Hold on, I'll make a note of it again so that I could show it to you really pretty. I didn't even know I was going to do this. 3 ways to raise your vibe. You know how they say your vibe attracts your tribe? Your vibe attracts your whole life. So the 3 ways of raising your vibration are, first and foremost, diet, okay? Things that weigh your vibration down are meats, dairies, sugars, caffeinated things, and alcohol. Of course, tobacco as well. But the main ones, again, are alcohol. I'll do it in reverse. Let's see if I can do it. Alcohol, caffeine, sugars. And that doesn't mean like maple syrup and honey in proportion. That means like white sugars, processed foods, meat, and dairy. They aren't good for us. We know it. Can we have self-control and reduce on those things, or just set goals? Or you don't have to do all these. These are just ways into greater self-esteem, because I'm saying my body matters. The way I look matters to me. I want to feel beautiful. I want to feel handsome, because then the self-esteem can come up a little bit when we're looking good, you know? Second way to raise your vibe is, okay, diet, exercise, so endorphins, right? That's easy for some people, hard for some people. You choose your medicine. And the third way to raise your vibe is momentum, setting goals, setting dreams, desires, choosing a hobby. As Hannah Rachel Froman says, when we're growing, we're happy, but we need momentum. So how do we get momentum? Like I said, goals, it could be through simple daily to-do lists if you're not holding there yet, weekly to-do lists, monthly to-do lists. Hire a business coach. Set some longer goals for yourself. This is actually one of my goals for this summer, is to hire a business coach. I'm so excited. I've worked with business coaches before, and I love the momentum it gives me. And so momentum, because this helps us feel healthfully productive, where we're actually taking action and taking responsibility for our lives, as opposed to that like vibe where I'm only judging my self-esteem based on if I'm productive. This is like a kind of a healthy way of doing it, but also we have to caution. So in this way, we begin to be more honest with ourselves in our lives. We begin to self-control goals, believe we're the most important person in the world, and really contemplate how life would be different if I truly believe that. Look at where I'm upset with others and see if I'm truly upset with myself in that place, and what I want to do to change those parts of my life, and raising your vibe through food, exercise, and momentum. So if even right now you're just feeling down on yourself, okay, like baby steps. Our culture has bred us to not like ourselves. Our culture has bred us to feel that we're not good enough. Our culture has bred us to reject love as opposed to accept it, because that would be, you know, by accepting it, we'd have to like believe some of the good. And I'll just tell you one final thing, because I think this is very, very important. When we only see ourselves as bad, right? We only look at the myopic bad things about us, the difficult things about us. We're actually in a serious state of disillusionment and falsehood, because nobody is all bad. It's not true. And true self-acceptance, so that I can begin to accept myself, to love myself, and then to have esteem. True self-acceptance, it doesn't mean that I'm accepting only my which is it, yin or my yang, my yin, my dark side. A whole picture, a holistic person, if we look at the yin and the yang, and if you don't know what that is, I'll just draw a quick image right now. The yin and the yang is that famous sign you see, you think is really cool when you're a kid. I'm just going to draw it in. And it represents the holistic nature of the world, the duality and the polarity of darkness and light, good and evil, right? So if I'm only looking at this part of myself, I'm not being truthful. I'm really, really not, because all of us have an equal and opposite polarity of light and goodness. And so what happens when I go into this place of non-self-acceptance, I'm only seeing the dark, I can only see that I'm unlovable, I can only see that I'm unworthy, then I'm actually denying the truth, which is the whole picture. So for example, even though I feel not good enough, I'm also incredible, right? Even though I have this belief that I'm a failure, I'm also an inspiration. Even though I have this belief that I'm disgusting or a pervert, I'm also sacred, godly, divine. Nothing comes out of polarity. And if you want to watch the law of polarity, you can look this up online as well. I also recommend the videos of Doron Geber for that one, men's coach. So when I am looking only at the dark, when the Yetzer Hara wants me to focus only on that which is bad about me or sucks about me, I'm really not being objective or holistic, because all of us are a complete picture. And if you have the dark, you also have the light. And if you really want to be honest and truthful with yourself, the only holistic view, self-acceptance, is to see also the dark and also the light. So you can actually, this is my final suggestion, make a chart of all of your darkness and see all of your shames, pains, and shadows, all the dark things you don't want to admit, right? I have to believe that I'm arrogant, I'm a narcissist, I'm not good enough, just all the different things that you could think of, or that you don't want to admit. And then take a look at all your phenomenal traits and your awesomeness, because if it's not balanced, it's not true. And if it's not true, we're not reality, and then we're in distortion again. So today we had a very profound lesson on the psychology of Torah and self-esteem. Then we took some methodologies of how to shake that up a little bit. Also, let's just be honest, tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, doing tshuva, repenting from our evil ways or the things, or just returning to our true self. If you know that something is real for you, going back to your true self, tefillah, prayer, tzedakah, charity, all of these majorly help in this process. This is one of the bigger processes that all of us have to endure in this life. So we said, setting self-control goals, because the more we put self-control into our lives, it makes a subconscious statement that we're worth it, that we have enough, that we are worthy of esteem and respect, and we're going to give that to ourselves through self-control. We can develop this concept, this idea of I'm the most important person in the world or in your life, if that one is too hard. We look at where we're upset with people and see if really it's just an outwards projection of where we're upset with ourselves. And we raise our vibe through food, working out, and momentum. And finally, we make that chart of the yin and the yang and see if we're looking at ourselves holistically, or if the Yetzer Hara is only staring at the darkness, because that's just not true. We are holistic. And as dark as we are dark, we are bright. So I, Mamish, gave us a blessing from the deepest depths of my heart, that in this true and real struggle with self-esteem that so many of us face, no matter if you're rich, poor, gorgeous, ugly, fat, thin, whatever, a lot of us struggle with self-esteem. And because the truth is that we are radiant, awesome, beautiful, pure souls, when we are in low self-esteem, we are actually in delusion, and we start losing our grip on reality, on sanity, on stability, and mental health. That's not true. God's like, you're precious, you're awesome, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, you're capable, you're struggling, and it's so amazing, and I respect you, and I envy you, and you're just this walking miracle. Then we start to tune back into esteem, into truth, into reality, sanity, and stability. Because you know what? It's better than giving up on ourselves. And I really bless myself to be completely matzliach, and you to be matzliach, and we should be the role models in the most unbelievable, humble self-esteem that has ever been known to mankind. Thank you so much for tuning in to Torah and Psychology. Namaste.